Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host Sana Maqbool with you at PTV WORLD. In today's show, we will be talking about two important stories. The first story is with reference to the Chief of Army Staff and the Corps Commanders meeting, who emphasized on the recent accidental firing, so-called by India, on the 9th of March, where a missile entered into Pakistan territory and fell near Mia Channu. The Chief of Army Staff emphasized upon this incident and talked about the huge grave consequences that could have happened and occurred due to such instances, and that this needs to be taken seriously on all international fora, and that the relevant international organizations must take notice of this, and also understand the importance in terms of the negative consequences that could have resulted due to such incidents, and then of course the triggering of further negative consequences because of these incidents in the future. Of course, we've seen that from the Indian side there has been regret, there has been a declaration that this was an accidental firing. However, because such incidents have happened in the past as well, it does put a question mark on what really happened. And then of course, even if it was an accidental misfire, the consequences still remain grave and need to be taken seriously. The relevant international organizations, according to the Chief of Army Staff, must take notice. We're going to explore this in further detail as to what Pakistan's responses should be in the coming days, and then of course what sort of action is required from the international organizations in this regard. We will also be taking a look at the issue of Islamophobia, something we discussed yesterday as well. And in the recent development, we know that the UN General Assembly has adopted a resolution put forward by Pakistan and other countries with regards to the 15th of March being adopted as the Universal Day Against Islamophobia. This, of course, is a big achievement in the step towards actually combating this menace and putting forward this as an issue which needs to be taken seriously and which needs to be catered to. Of course, what are the implications in terms of the international responses that we have received? Because we understand that, of course, India and then France and the European Union also had their own reservations with regards to this. And then we also know that Islamophobia is prevalent in these areas as well. What sort of justifications or questions are being raised in terms of this declaration? And moving forward, how is this declaration going to be used as a foundation of moving towards actual change, both in Pakistan and in other parts of the world? We're going to discuss that as well in our show today. As always, we've been joined by Farrukh, Pitafi and Raja Faisal in the studios. And for our first segment, we've been joined by Lieutenant General Retired Mr. Naeem Khalid Lodi. He's a former National Security Advisor, and he has joined us for the first segment. Thank you very much, Mr. Naeem, for joining us. I'll start with you. When we talk about what happened on the 9th of March, we've also discussed in further detail previously as well, talking about how the response from the Indian side has been of regret and accidental firing. But the fact remains that the issue could have been a lot worse, and that perhaps the gravity of this situation is not being underscored enough and not being realized enough by the world at large. When we talk about international organizations actually taking notice of this, what do we really mean? What do we want the relevant organizations to do about this?
No, there seems to be a breakdown, but I've understood the question.
Okay.
Although I'm getting my echo also. The first thing is that I think the reaction of Corps Commanders Conference is very appropriate, and we are also trying. I think the Foreign Office is also trying to raise the level, but I think the level is being raised very gradually and slowly. In my opinion, it is so serious. And just let me, for the information of your viewers, that what all this means. Any strategic system has got three main components. One is the warhead, the other is the delivery system, and the third most important is the command and control system. And this command and control system has got some very fail-safe arrangements about accidental launch, such as negative controls. Negative controls mean that if you don't intend launching it, there are a number of layers of protection that ensures that it is not launched. And positive controls, which means that once you want to launch it, then there are no impediments and you can actually launch. And there's a third thing, which is a self-destruct mechanism. So if it is launched accidentally, you can always destroy it en route. So this, missile, it got launched, then it went to a certain point, then it changed its course towards Pakistan, And all along, neither we were informed nor the self-destruct mechanism was, invoked. So all this to me seems to be a farce. It is just not possible that a missile can become rogue, and especially a missile which is in my reckoning, although it has not been announced that way, which can carry nuclear warheads. So it is not a ballistic missile. It is some sort of some other missile which can change its course and all that. So I think that it requires, first of all, some coordination with China, because this sort of accidental launch should be very seriously taken by China also. So Pakistan and China together, they must go to the UN Security Council and invoke whatever clauses can. I am not aware of that. It comes into lawfare, and we must sensitize the UN that or other such platform that this is what could have happened.
All right, Mr. Naim, kindly let me know if you can hear me.
General Sahab, can you hear us?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Right. General Sahab, since you brought up the issue of, and I think that is the most pertinent thing at this moment, we can analyze what exactly happened, but the question right now is of the platforms, where to actually go and approach. I understand that the UN is one such body, but there must be specialist platforms regarding, mishandling of command and control and such, missiles. Where exactly is that, and how to actually approach them, sir? This is the question at this moment. Can you help us understand?
Yes, I think I will not try to venture in an area of which I am not an expert, because I do not know. I only know that international IEA, they cannot actually do anything about it, because they only deal with civil nuclear things. So this can be taken to MTCR, missile control regime, where missiles, there's a understanding that whenever you launch a system, whenever you try a system, you inform your neighbors, and then whenever the missile's range is more than 300 kilometers, then again there are some restrictions. So I think MTCR is the platform which comes to my mind. But the
Right.
seriousness about the accident and incident is such, it can even be taken to UN Security Council, in my opinion.
Right, and that is a good point. I know Raja Saab also wants
Yeah.
to come in, but very quickly, my problem, General Saab and Raja Saab and Sana, is that usually we are actually told whenever there is some problem or some kind of accusation against Pakistan that there are humongous platforms and protocols that are going to take care of everything and control us or then fine us. But then all of a sudden, the same thing happens from India's end. And all of a sudden, we see that those platforms don't even seem to appear or be visible anywhere. And that is the frustrating part. Why is it that such a big thing has happened and we haven't heard a single, cry from any country at all?
Right.
China is the
and,
only
and,
exception.
And perhaps, Farrukh, it's because when even bigger things have happened, we have still not heard anything. And perhaps the why is
This
the
is
same.
very big.
The why is very same.
This could have actually culminated into a nuclear face-off between the two nuclear
Right,
rivals.
but nobody's taking India seriously. There's no consequence.
Yeah,
Faisal?
if I could put in something into it, there was time when, of course, Pakistan was fighting war on terror, and obviously Pakistan was constantly hearing from America, constantly going through reports based on assumptions by CIA and elsewhere, and they were claiming that Pakistan's nukes are are insecure. At that time they were claiming, and obviously Pakistan maintained that we are a responsible country and everything was in place at that time. The only basis they used to find that there is extremism, Islamic extremism going on in Pakistan, so that's why there is a serious threat to the nukes at that time. But my question is, why can't they come up with the same kind of reports today? And what do we hear today? They are just saying that we do not find any indication to disagree with India. Whatever India has said, we have to accept them, accept their notion on it. Why can't they say that today's India is saffronized, and the saffronization of Indian army, saffronization of different institutions of India it is alarming for India itself as well as the region as well. What if one of the saffronized army guy, he was sitting there of DRDO, and he is the one who actually conducted all of this failed operation of sending a missile to Pakistan, and they are just covering it up, sir?
Right,
I
and General
think,
Saab, just to
Raja-
add to this, let me ask you very quickly, what would have happened if Pakistan would have decided to return the courtesy and responded in kind?
Right. So Raja Saab raises a very pertinent point. This has been the argument against us all along about our command and control system and about these things falling into the hands of rogue elements. And both these things have been proved that India is actually the culprit as far as the loose command and control is concerned, even if we believe what they say. Although I said that I don't believe that. And the second thing is more important, that this means that within their armed forces, uniformed forces, there are such elements, such extremists, such rogue people, those who can do all this. Because people do ask that what could be the purpose of doing this. The purposes are very two important things I must highlight. One is to map our response capability and to find out that how do we respond. And second is to hold a sort of, we call it escalation dominance, that you must have heard that there were submarines found in our territorial waters, and then so they are trying to dominate the escalation, that we can do a thing and go unpunished. Now, Pitafi sir, what you asked, that what could have gone wrong, I think in my assessment, we picked up this projectile from the very initial stages, but there are means probably to find out whether it is nuclear tipped or it is void of any warhead or something. I think there was a assessment made that what is it carrying, and after they were sure that maybe it is not carrying anything. Although I do agree that I am not aware of if there is anything of this sort where you can really evaluate whether there is a nuclear or any other warhead or not. I think
Right.
if we had retaliated, the war would have been on. And in this scenario where America and Russia are busy in Ukraine, and we have some internal things going on, this would have been a very bad moment
Right,
to
and
start
Mr.
this
Naim,
type of war.
Mr. Naim, when we talk about the escalation that you were earlier referring to, and Pakistan has always tried to not let things escalate and has been a responsible nuclear state in the past as well and continues to do so. However, when we see such violations repeatedly under the garb of accidental errors or mistakes, we also understand that this is something that has happened in other aspects with our relationship with India as well, in terms of perhaps ceasefire violations, airspace violations. We've seen that happen in the past as well. There has to be a certain limit to what our strategy is in terms of the consequence in terms of how we deal with India. Because as Farrukh was pointing out, and as you've also spoken about, there doesn't seem to be a body or an arm that we can really rely on in terms of dealing with the consequences.
True, exactly. That is, the most difficult thing to do, to balance out two things. And what are those two things? One is to show prudence, to show a little cool behavior and absorb all this. And secondly, the environment which is being built by India, which is a new cold start, I would say, environment. You see, these submarines coming and these missiles coming, and we not responding in that manner, in that high manner, which are maybe good also for the region, which also means that India is building a new environment for cold start, whereas the next missile can come and all that. So what I suggest is to our military and political leadership, that they should now give a sort of they draw a red line or give a sort of ultimatum that if anything of this sort happens again, there will be an appropriate and immediate response, and the world should know it. I think we must at least give this sort of statement. Otherwise, we are getting into a very negative environment.
Right. General Sahab, you were talking about cold start, and I understand that the entirety of the jointness and theater command unification is basically driven by that idea. But regardless what happened, the question at this moment is that every time India does something unique, something which actually violates Pakistan's sovereignty in one way or the other, And yet all those international bodies that we keep on referring to every time we talk about proliferation or some kind of escalation, and as a consequence we focus on them, they seem to disappear. They disappeared in 2019 when there was this attack on Pakistani city, and this is what is happening now as well. Do you think that all this international law facade is meant only for us, not for anybody else? Particularly day before yesterday, the Foreign Office, America's Secretary of State, not Secretary, actually State Department spokesman was asked to comment on this, and he refused to comment on this, right? And he merely talked about accident. I mean, this could have led to any kind of escalation of war. Do you think that international bodies are not going to do anything at all now?
Uh, uh, I can give you my own assessment. I don't insist on that. I think the muted response from American side demonstrates one thing very clearly, because it was directed towards Pakistan, and America, for the time being, is not very happy with us. So I'm sure that and the type of agreements which India and America have in between them, I think they were informed already that this is what we are going to do. Otherwise, the response could not have been that muted. So
So
what
this
you
was
raised
not an
the
accident. This
right.
was by design.
This is what I think. This is my assessment.
It
So I
seems.
think what you are saying is absolutely correct. In my opinion, we must call an emergency national security committee meeting and issue a statement, as I said earlier, that nothing of this sort will be accepted in future, and we must make a folder of the submarine appearances of this missile, of proliferation news that we have got, and submit it to wherever it is, appropriate, and then tell India in very clear terms that from now onward, this is the line drawn, and anything, even a stone coming from your side, will be responded immediately and promptly.
Right.
Yeah,
And
sir, I just wanted to highlight here, if we look at how India dealt with it, Prime Minister of India, who happens to be, head of the government, he did not say a single word about it. And of course, Defense Minister is the one who came up with the statement, and it was a statement, saying that regrets, not even an apology. And what if something goes wrong in the region? What would they do? And there's another thing, sir. We have this missile crisis was one. There is another thing, 42 incidents of illegal sale of uranium. That too is happening in India, and IAEA is saying nothing about it. And when it comes to India's obviously coalition with the Americans, you have already highlighted about it, that they have of course a contract, and in accordance to that contract they're going through. Shouldn't Pakistan be highlighting it at a larger level and telling its allies, the Indian allies in the West, to buckle up their child or buckle up their buddy in the region? Because if they don't buckle it up, of course there will be dire consequences for the whole region to face, because this is what is reaches to an escalation. And right now, shouldn't we be seeking apology from head of the state, that is Modi? He should be coming forward with an apology.
Right, and very quickly, General Sahab, earlier you spoke about the folders, putting together a folder. So that actually reminded me that we have actually brought together many dossiers now. This will be fourth or fifth dossier of its kind. So, sir, it seems to me that we are becoming librarians, that we keep on putting together all these folders, don't do much else. Is
True.
there any way to actually take care of this as well, sir?
I think whatever you are saying, both of you, it turns my attention to the Ukraine crisis, and one can say that one big lesson from Ukraine war is that every country has to fight their own war. You can have some support, some moral support, some material support, but nobody comes and fight for you, and we have seen it very clearly over there. So I think this is true that one, we must sensitize all the Indian allies that what India is doing, but we must also sensitize all our friends what India is doing, and try our best, whatever we can do at diplomatic levels and at all levels. But we have to make our own statement strong. We have to make our own deterrence strong, so that such things do not happen, because these happenings cannot be stopped by international community. They will have to be stopped by our own deterrence capability. This is the end of it.
Right, and Mr. Naeem, my last question to you. When you talked about earlier, talked about how there needs to be a standard set that if there is any such violation again in the future, it will be met by an appropriate and immediate response. I want to understand what sort of a situation will there be when that the cost of that would be less than what the cost of actually responding would be. When we understand that there is a limit, of course, but when can we actually be able to do that? Because when we talk about deterrence, it sort of stops when you actually take an action.
Yes, now this is a very loaded question which you have asked, and it also indicates your understanding of these matters, and I'm very happy about it. For example, what we can do is that in case next time we detect a submarine in our waters, we should tell them we are going to shoot it, or at least damage it. And whenever there is a missile coming towards our direction, the moment we feel that it is 2 minutes away from us or 1 minute away from us, we must have our missile ready to be launched in response, not necessarily with a nuclear warhead, but a tit for tat missile launch must be ensured. So these are the things where you can control the escalation, at the same time give them the message that we cannot take it anymore. Because if you remain under that fear that it may not start a nuclear war, then actually you are allowing the enemy to keep dominating the escalation ladders. I think
Very
that we should
quickly,
not
General
allow.
Sahab, when you were saying that we should be actually using a missile as a tit for tat, did you mean intercept it, or did you mean attack them with a new one separately, independent of this one?
If you want to intercept it, then it should be done, a little 4 to 5 kilometers in
Within
Indian
India.
territory, so that right. And if we think that interception is difficult, because at times there are certain missiles which cannot be intercepted at such a short notice, especially the cruise missiles. The one, I think this was the type.
Supersonic.
Then you have to launch a missile in an area which is not important, which is not populated, but you have to show your resolve, because without that our deterrence will get watered down, and it will go down to such a level that they will keep on doing whatever they wish to.
Thank you very much, General Naeem Khalid Lodi, for joining us in the debate and extensively talking to us about this issue. Farrukh, it seems that at the end of the day, when we've talked about what the response needs to be and the statements have come out, it seems that we've done at best whatever we could as a responsible state at this moment, keeping in mind the kind of escalation and a threat to regional security could possibly be. In terms of the international organizations, wherever they may be, in approaching them and getting them on board in terms of any consequence that India could be facing, Pakistan has done its effort. Is that correct?
Sana, this is now very interesting aspect. Remember that day when India claimed that it actually had conducted surgical strikes within Pakistan or Pakistani controlled territory? At that time, it was astounding that what we were doing was we took our foreign journalists to the LOC and showed them that there was no such incursion. Right?
Exactly.
We are fighting information war with information war, propaganda with truth. But the problem is that doesn't actually change the enemy or his intentions. They keep on feeding into their own propaganda, and they keep on inhaling their own propaganda as well, right? What happened next? Then Balakot happened. What happens now? This happened, right? So you'll have to find a way to A, expose them internationally, B, also give some kind of response, at least inflict some kind of cost. In 2019, I remember that we caught their pilot, and that was some kind of cost, right? At this moment, if this becomes a thing, remember Bhajapa believes that cow dung can spare them from radiation. So if they want to start a nuclear war, they can, because they will think that their own, these things will protect them.
Yeah,
and in the end, it will annihilate the entire region. this becomes a problem at this moment. I think we need to have a very deliberate or well thought out response, and it has to have multi-pronged aspects to it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Kinetic and others as well.
Sana, I wanted to highlight two things. Number one, we should not be ignoring the factor of saffronization. What if there is an army within an army in Indian Army that is saffronized, and they are going along things different way, and the Indian Army is going, and it is a matter of indiscipline within the army that is being faced by India. And what if they were searching for some kind of a target, or maybe they had a false intelligence about a target there, and they wanted to hit it. Like, we know that they keep on pushing forward Bollywood movies about, they'll attack one of the madrasas and this kind of stuff, and they'll hail within their own political atmosphere about it. And to me, I think they wanted to do that kind of thing, but it was a failure. And I'm talking about the army within an army. They did it,
right?
And saffronized army.
And
the second thing,
Sana, with your
what
permission,
can we do about it?
Second thing.
I tell you very, very quickly, because it came from Raja Saab, and I very humbly actually have a request for him and Pakistani state as well. When we talk about something which is essentially seems true, but is essentially in hypotheticals, what if this happened? I think we can do better. Remember that Indian propaganda sites keep on pushing strange kind of stories. Dr. Amir Liakat's picture in uniform is shown as somebody who has been killed in Pakistan because of civil war, right? What we need to do is we should actually dig out these facts, and next time when Raja Saab actually speaks, he should come up and name people that there are so and so groups in India that are actually posing threat to India's secular army. So that we can fight them, right?
Exactly. There are reports that within Indian Army, even the CEOs, they are getting promoted on the basis of their political affiliations. Number one. Number two, right now, if we look at the current situation, the political situation of India, Yogi Adityanath, he has won the election, and he might become the next Prime Minister of India. And if he becomes Prime Minister in coming future, then we already know that Janam Manoj Pandey, who's sitting at Vice Chief of Army Staff, he will be becoming Chief of Army Staff very soon. Who knows that Janan Nirwane was a bit saner, but the guy who replaces him, he is not sane enough, and he is the one who hails and highlights the saffronization of the Indian Army.
So since we are still talking about hypotheticals as well, let me give you one. What if?
See, everything starts with a probability.
Hang on.
Everything starts with a probability.
Hang on, I'm not disagreeing with you, my brother. Just allow and listen to what I'm saying. I was just saying, what if, God forbid, this missile that came here was tipped with nukes or something similar? What would have happened? Just imagine radius and impact on the region, right? So we cannot actually take it lying down. You have to actually respond, and you have to find a way. Your foreign office, your military, your intelligence, your other forces, your political diaspora, everyone has to come together to agitate this point, because this is a proof that India has gone rogue, and its nuclear program is in worst hands possible.
Exactly.
If we don't do it, perhaps tomorrow we might not be alive
and
to talk about it.
If there are rogue elements,
absolutely.
If there are rogue elements, they need to be eradicated.
Okay, let's move on to our second segment as well, because at the end of the day, when we talk about the issues that Pakistan is facing, only Pakistan can actually do something about it, because it is up to us to protect our country and our citizens. When we talk about the issue of Islamophobia, something that we've discussed yesterday as well, it is a big victory for Pakistan as well, since it has advocated this issue and talked about how this needs to be dealt with on an international level. And now 15th of March has been adopted as the Universal Day Against Islamophobia by the UN General General Assembly. But of course, much still remains when we talk about this resolution as well, in terms of the actions that need to be taken place, and how do we align those actions globally? What sort of a campaign needs to be put out, and what are the actual measures that can be taken? But before that, there has been talk about how this resolution only talks about actions against a particular religion and not the rest. Faisal, when we talk about this declaration, it does still state that any violation against any religion is not acceptable, and that it declares the action against such violations and discriminations as well. And it has also mentioned specific religions as well. Why is there still this debate, and especially from countries like India, France, and the EU, that it does not take into account religions in general?
Sana, first of all, let me hail Prime Minister Imran Khan for his efforts in United Nations. It started back in 2019, UNGA. He started from there, and he highlighted it from there. And of course, he had a support of more than 55 countries of the world. That was Muslim countries. And now when we have this resolution, I think it was a much needed one, because the increasing Islamophobia, not only in the West but in the East as well, in India. India happens to be one of the biggest, calls itself one of the biggest democracies of the world, and yet there is Islamophobia, yet there is discrimination of Muslims within themselves, not even Muslims but the minorities as well. But why I believe that this is a huge step, because if we look at today's Europe, of course, it is always considered as advanced in technology, advanced in education, advanced in everything, and advocate of human rights, and advocate of freedom of speech and everything. But there were certain aspects of freedom of speech, of right to say something, they needed to be addressed to. Nobody should have a freedom of speech to the extent that they start hurting the sentiments of more than 1 billion people of the world. And what they were doing, while they were saying or doing something against Prophet Muhammad Mustafa Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they were actually hurting the sentiments of more than 1 billion population of the world. And this had to stop somewhere. And we saw that the leaders like Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, he highlighted it as well. Time and again, there were many presidents, heads of the states of the world who highlighted it, that it needs to be stopped. And I think there was, even in the media as well, there was time that newspapers like Charlie Hebdo and magazines like these kind of magazines nobody knew about, and they came up with the idea, well, nobody knows us. There is a way of marketing ourselves that say something against the prophet of the Muslims, and that's how we will get famous. These kind of cheap tactics were applied, and cheap ways of promoting themselves. And I think there should have been time that it all stops, and it will stop now.
Okay, sure. Let me also rephrase the question for you, Farrukh. Is this an issue which is particularly with reference to Islam prevalent in a larger scale than it is with other religions?
Right, and that is a very good question, but allow me to actually first answer what Raja Saab was saying, right? It depends, all of this depends on how you define the issue, right? You can, of course, talk about blasphemy or, hurting sentiments of Muslims, but that is not all. Muslims have been physically attacked all over the world, right? There are umpteen books that have documented this kind of violations of their basic rights. For example, America is thought to be the torchbearer of liberty, and yet it has done strange things in Guantanamo Bay. And we know a case is still pending where a person was raped multiple times and destroyed, totally pulverized, right? And they still haven't actually released him. This is one aspect which is very important. Regarding the Prophet, Holy Prophet's name and our faith, I tell you something very interesting. My belief is, and it is informed by the study of religion, especially Maulana Wahiduddin, his book called Shatmur Rasul Ka Masla, or the issue of blasphemy against Prophet. And it is said that you cannot blaspheme against the Prophet's name because he is like star or sun. Even if you do something, it actually violates your own self, it cannot hurt it, right? Similarly, when you talk about the rights of basic rights of human beings around the world, I think that in the past 20 years, for example, Spencer Ackerman has written a beautiful book called Reign of Terror. It is about war on terror and how it became a war on Muslims, right? And particularly you were talking about India, France and Europe. Let us treat all these countries separately.
Okay.
First, India is one of the inventors of Islamophobia. They have been doing it, and you can go in India and listen to their hardliners and you will know how they are actually presenting Islam now, right? France again has a very big component of India's intelligence agency called RAW, and which keeps on playing with it, right? That is one aspect. Amazingly, whenever a terrorist act takes place in Europe, particularly France, and then it is linked to Pakistan, Indian media does something strange. They talk about the chuck number, the house number, and the street number, and they start talking about how his parents were this or that or the other thing, right? They know everything, we wouldn't, right? And this seems to be some kind of a plot. In France right now, there is a lot of cultural pushback, particularly by the neo-Nazis, by the hard right, who actually keep on playing, and there's an election going on. So that's why in France you will see there will be a huge problem. In India, India has gone on, actually gone off the deep end, and it has become the dark side. You cannot recover it. As far as Europe is concerned, EU has a problem because all the countries which are part of the EU's parliament, they wanted to undermine EU. They actually inducted all the hard right extremists into the EU, right, their parliament. And that's what they keep on pushing towards such kind of measures. We'll have to keep on fighting it, and it is important to fight. They fight against stereotyping of Muslims. It is important, not merely about one belief or the other, but the entire, manipulation of Muslims and how they are presented as the enemy of the civilization. That is important.
Let me welcome in the debate Mr. Zamir Akram, who's a former ambassador, and also Hamid Khan, who's a senior analyst. Thank you very much for joining us in the debate. Earlier, we were talking about Islamophobia, and we know, of course, that the resolution has been adopted, which talks about the 15th of March as the International Day Against Islamophobia. But let me put this question to you, Mr. Zamir. When we talk about resolutions, we've seen in the past as well that even though this is a success in terms of highlighting a certain issue, more often than not, that's perhaps the only purpose it serves. Will this resolution set the stage for actual action to be taken against Islamophobia, especially on a global level? Do you think that this resolution will add value in the fight against Islamophobia?
I think it certainly will add value. It is a very important step in the direction of taking concrete, practical action. Because the important thing is that when this resolution has been adopted in the UN General Assembly, you have more than 190 countries that have joined in this consensus. So this is an international commitment now to combat Islamophobia. And this can be held up to countries that violate this understanding with this against Islamophobia. This can be held up to them for their behavior and violation of this very important resolution that has been adopted to mark the day of Islamophobia on 15 May. So it is a very important step. It's obviously a step in the right direction, but it is not the end of the road. That's what we should be very clear about, that there is a lot of work that needs to be done in the future.
Right,
what are those steps?
Yeah, my question exactly. Ambassador sir, can we identify what exactly are the steps that can be taken to fight this menace?
Great brains
Well,
think
you
alike.
know, when I was in the UN in Geneva and the Human Rights Council, we had adopted a resolution almost 10 years ago which established consensus amongst the countries on taking a action plan. The action plan is called the Istanbul process, and that is very much there. And that action plan shows what kind of steps need to be taken. Amongst those steps is one very important thing: leadership. It's the leaders of the world that need to speak out and speak up, which our prime minister has done, which the Turkish president has done, and so many others have done. And now we've heard these words coming from the Russian president, from the Canadian president, from the Canadian prime minister, and the New Zealand prime minister. So the other world leaders need to speak out. That's one very important thing. The second is to deal governments to deal with racial profiling, religious profiling, discrimination in every part of government activity, whether it is hiring a person for a job, or ensuring the upholding the human rights and fundamental freedoms of people. So these are some of the things that have to come into the law books of the governments in the international
Right.
community. That's also a very important step. But
Right,
I think that
Ambassador
for
sir,
me,
this is great. Can I also ask you, is it possible to request the Secretary General of the UN to actually institute some kind of inquiry as to what exactly are the steps that might be leading to Islamophobia and how to actually deconstruct it? That way, it becomes a research topic as well, and we will have all the evidences needed to deconstruct the phenomenon.
we can do that. It has been done. In this, I wanted to just tell you that the biggest issue here is to determine the the line between hate speech and free speech.
All right.
That is really the real crux of the matter, because the Western countries argue that when they are saying something which hurts Muslims, that they are exercising free speech. But free speech is not absolute. There are limitations to it, and those limitations need to be applied in the case of Islamophobia. Now, that's the kind of thing that the UN Secretary General, the Human Rights Council, and others need to do in terms of identifying the threshold between hate speech and free speech.
Yeah,
Right, and
Hamid,
another thing,
Hamid.
I'll just go to Hamid as well, Faisal. When
First,
we talk
welcome.
about the issue of Islamophobia, or any issue for that matter, we always talk about definitions and the understanding of the issue at hand. And especially when we're talking about the issue on a global level, then we want alignment of the understanding as well. And when we talk about Islamophobia, there are many, many layers and contexts to it. And that, of course, will define the strategy that we need to deal with it on a global scale. Is there going to be a measure taken after this resolution on a global level where we can actually sit down and devise a policy or a framework which actually looks into setting the standard or definition of what Islamophobia is, what all it entails, and then what actually all the countries who are part of this resolution or who talk about the same issue need to take?
Who should answer this?
This resolution has been passed from in the United Nations. But as you said, this is the first step. Actually, now I mean we have to push the United Nations to take a proper, notice of this issue and take further actions against Islamophobia. This is admission from the United Nations that yes, Islamophobia is an issue to be addressed, and it has been at a high, very peak within last 20 years, and the people, especially the Muslims, have suffered from it around the world. And I believe that the Muslim world needs to support the cause of Pakistan, because it is a cause of for the entire Muslim Ummah, and the way Muslims will react on it, it will be a very positive message for the rest of the world. And as we were talking about the France and other countries where Islamophobia is on peak, I would like to tell you that the situation is not good in America, the situation is not good in UK, but there is only one way, and that is the unity of the Muslims. There should be a message from the Muslim world that now this is the time that Muslims are together against any kind of blasphemy act and against the Islamophobia. And now the world has to take action. I mean, this United Nations resolution is the first step. there are further steps which are needed to be taken, and something like there some kinds of rules, some kind of sanctions to the countries like India and others, where they will know that if there will be a very much high rise of Islamophobia, the people who are suffering, they should get some kind of compensation. There should be some proper explained laws against it. If you look into the entire situation, I mean, Pakistan's role is brilliant, and like Justin Trudeau, and then Putin, and then Secretary General of United Nations, they all addressed and admit this Islamophobia as an issue after the address from Prime Minister of Pakistan, and that's why we must understand that the role of Pakistan is brilliant. Then it is going to be more effective if there will be a voice from rest of the Muslim countries as well. Especially, we need to use OIC platform more effectively to raise the issue of Islamophobia, and to enforce some kind of legislation, some kind of laws against Islamophobia. This is the time when Muslim world can take advantage and can pursue towards further laws against Islamophobia. That is the only way to
All
stop
right.
it or tackle
Right.
it at the moment.
Right. Sana, very quickly, I just wanted to add to this. It is important to remember that whatever has happened essentially is part of the UN and their processes, and it is important, but it is driven by politicians or leaders, right, who have
Yeah.
actually given these speeches. At this moment, what is important is to understand and to study how other cultures, particularly which have been subjected to such kind of violations or such kind of hate, for example, Judaism, they have actually combated it. Particularly when you talk about anti-Semitism, I can reference at least 4 dozen books off the top of my head, which are great, and they have actually studied it, deconstructed, and then brought together proposals to fight it. We at this moment are depending on these leaders and their charisma, which is important, but remember, no politics can continue forever. You have to have an academic background in this as well, and a solid foundation where you can actually seek help even from non-Muslims who can contribute, and then you can fight this.
Ambassador Zamir, as we know that we have been seeing all of these millennium goals and all, could we see that this resolution becoming part of the sorts of millennium goals? Because if we look at today's speech of Prime Minister Imran Khan, he highlighted whatever has happened in India as well, banning of hijab, and same is happening in the European countries as well. So, sir, could we see that this becoming something of very importance that actually can affect the constitutions of the countries?
Well, the Millennium Development Goals are basically focused on economic, social, cultural development. But in an indirect way, you can say that when we are talking about development which is non-discriminatory on any, whether on basis of race, religion, caste, creed, sex, or whatever, so in that sense, yes, you can make an argument that Islamophobia can lead to and does lead to disenfranchisement of people and discrimination against them on the basis of their faith is an obstacle to their right to development and to their right to a better lifestyle. So yes, this argument can be made, but the Millennium Development Goals are already, written, and they are already accepted, and they are already in application. What we can do is draw the kind of linkage along the lines that I had mentioned, based on the freedom that is taken for granted as a reason, as a means to development.
All right, thank you so much,
And
Mr.
there's a
Zamir,
UN
for
Charter, Human Rights
joining us,
Charter.
and Hamid Khan for joining us in the debate as well and being a part of the show. Of course, a lot still remains to be done, but it is important to recognize that Pakistan has made a lot of efforts in this regard, and because of that, this has happened, and this is just a first step towards what needs to be done. There is a long way to go, but it still means that when we make an effort towards something and raise our voice against something, we can actually get a benefit out of it. Again, there is a lot of work that still needs to be done, but we hope that Pakistan and the rest of the countries will actually do it. Thank you so much for watching the debate, and we'll see you tomorrow at 7:05.